The president of Israel is openly calling for a genocide, saying there are no innocent civilians in Gaza. You cannot overstate how batshit crazy this is. The Israeli president is publicly acknowledging and admitting that the official strategic position of the Israeli army is to indiscriminately slaughter every man, woman, and child in Gaza. This is, of course, once again a violation of international law. But Israel can do it. So why is Israel getting away with it? Because Israel is the lapdog of the United States. And if the United States says yes, okay, then it happens. You already heard the president lie to the world earlier this week when he said that he saw photos of beheaded babies. And I can only imagine the sense of relief and euphoria Israeli government officials must have felt when they heard their propaganda being repeated by the most powerful man in the world. U.S. State Department officials have even circulated internal warnings within the State Department that they are forbidden to use phrases such as de-escalation, ceasefire, end to violence and bloodshed, restoring calm. The United States is absolutely complicit in what may be one of the worst atrocities committed in recent memory. We live in a world where the Israeli head of state can say without a trace of irony that he is up against an empire of evil, a strip of land which is one of the poorest places on earth, one of the greatest victims of international terrorism, is part of an empire of evil. Every accusation is only an admission.
I don't really know what else to keep saying about it, but I have to say something, so here goes nothing. I saw a tweet from a doctor in Gaza today who had a bottle of vinegar from the corner store talking about how they needed it to treat Pseudomonas infection because that's how badly the medical infrastructure has collapsed in Gaza. I mean, can you imagine watching a hospital being bombed and a church being bombed and a UN school being bombed and having all of this medical knowledge inside of your head and you are armed with a bottle of vinegar from the corner store? The thing I keep thinking about it is how it's already too late. How even if humanitarian aid was allowed in this instant, thousands more people are still going to die. They're already chronically malnourished and now acutely dehydrated and starving. The roads for aid to even get there are destroyed. The infections are already taking root. The sepsis is already happening. That's if aid was allowed in this instant. That's not even where we're at. We have the United States vetoing UN resolutions to call for a ceasefire. Palestinians deserve so much more than humanitarian aid. We deserve liberation, and y'all are debating if it's worth turning the electricity back on for them. I haven't been able to take a sip of water without thinking about them. I'm about to go work 12 hours overnight in an ICU, and all I can think about is how I would do anything to tag one of those nurses out for 12 hours so they could get some sleep. And how privileged my hospital has antibiotics and pain medicine. They're doing surgeries in the street without anesthesia. The cruelty is the point. They're doing surgeries without anesthesia. I feel like a completely different person than I was 2 weeks ago. There have been 100 moments in the last few days that have absolutely broken my mind. All I can do is keep speaking and asking for you to keep speaking. That's the only thing the people in Gaza are asking, that we do not remain silent. So please do not be silent, if not because you see Palestinians as human beings, because this is a public health crisis and you should know that it is bad and wrong. Keep making posts, keep calling your representatives, keep uplifting Palestinian voices. I'm discouraged and they want me to feel discouraged, so I will not let them win and I will not remain silent. I hope you choose to do the same.
We are not just calling for an end to the genocide of the over 2 million Palestinians living in Gaza. We are calling for an end to the powers that have created this genocide. Not just the current day one, but the genocide of the Palestinian people that has been ongoing for 75 years. 75 years of massacres. 75 years of home displacements, creating millions of refugees worldwide. 75 years of children in prisons. 75 years of dreams, each Palestinian our own universe, denied the ability to achieve our dreams. Most importantly, 75 years of resistance by Palestinians and non-Palestinians, both in Palestine and outside of Palestine, who see the truth. Do not infantilize us when you are standing in solidarity with us, especially the Palestinians on the ground who are agents of their own liberation. They don't need us to instruct them on how to liberate themselves. In this most urgent moment, we are demanding that the Israeli government stop bombing the Palestinians living in Gaza. The call to action from the Palestinians on the ground is to make as much noise as possible on the streets, on your phones, wherever you can. Peace, freedom, liberation, all of these things that we're talking about, they can only be achieved with an end to the powers that have created the conditions that have led to where we are today. This is what it means to stand in solidarity with the Palestinian people.
My heart is so torn, and I don't know if I should feel so sad for the Palestinian lives that were lost, or so happy because they finally live in peace. I just want to say this very clearly. The blood spilled is not just on the hands of the Israeli government. It is on the hands of every single celebrity who endorsed this genocide. It is on the hands of every single company who silenced their employees for speaking out. It is on the hands of every single person who uttered the words, "Israel has the right to defend themselves." One day you will all wake up and realize you were on the wrong side of history.
ما خلونيش شيء يا حبايبي، ما خلونيش شيء يا بطل العشاء. انت عليك
يا ريت انا اروح عند ابوي كمان.
السبعة مع امهم، السبعة مع امهم، السبعة مع امهم يا الله.
اذا بتتعلق من امك اسميك يا الله يا الله يا الله.
Now, there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of innocent men, women, and children in Gaza who have lost their homes. They've been thrown out of their homes. They have no food, they have no water, they have no fuel. And I remind my colleagues that half of those people are children. Half of the people in Gaza are children. Before this whole business, Gaza was one of the most desperately poor places in the world. Youth unemployment, 75%. Many of their people depended on the UN for basic survival. So what I'm asking people to take a look at is to understand what our country is about. And what our country must not be involved in is making the horrific and miserable situation in Gaza even worse. These are people thrown out of their homes. They don't know where they're going. They don't know who will accept them. They don't know if they're ever going back to their homes. And they're poor to begin with. And do we really want to deny those people aid from the UN and other agencies to feed the children, to provide water for them? Is that really what we are about? The world is looking at us. And the world understands that what Hamas did was terrible. But they don't want to see our great country turn its back on innocent women and children. That, in my view, is not what this country is about.
Now is not the time to play political games. We need to make sure that the other nations and terrorist groups do not...
Now is not the time to play political games. How many bombs need to be dropped on Gaza before we call for a ceasefire? How many children need to be killed? Our families are dying. Our families are dying. We need a ceasefire now. We need a ceasefire now. Ceasefire now. Ceasefire now.
18 years ago, Israel took the brave step of dismantling Israeli settlements in Gaza, handing it... Almost immediately after the...
The committee will come to order. Let me make it clear, we will not tolerate interruptions in our hearing. You see what's going to be happening. We ask that those that have strong views, there's a place to express it, but it's not to disrupt this hearing. I will not tolerate that.
Palestine Terminology 101. These are the words you should be using when discussing Palestine and Palestinians. Since the settler colony of Israel was established in 1948, they've been using the power of language and words to control our narrative and establish their false legitimacy to the world. On top of Western media constantly portraying us as the villain and blatantly displaying their bias. Now it's time for us to fight back and reclaim our narrative, sharing our truth in the same way through the power of language and words. The biggest thing you need to learn from this video is that there needs to be a collective shift of perspective on what Israel is. Defining Israel as a concept. We have to shift from viewing this as Israel as a country versus Palestine as a country to viewing it as a settler colony called Israel occupying the country of Palestine. This is colonizer versus colonized or colonizee. Same way white Europeans landed in North America and decided to claim the land as their own despite the native population, white Europeans landed in Palestine and decided to claim it as their own despite the indigenous Palestinian population. Remember, settler colony, country, colonizer, colonized. So starting with the first word, Israel, when describing what it is, don't say country, say settler colony. Even when using its name, don't just say Israel, say settler colony of Israel. Or if you're writing it out, put it in quotes. By calling it just straight up Israel, we're legitimizing the idea that they have the right to establish a colony on top of an existing country. But it's also the only thing that the world knows it as, so this is a little difficult, but it's kind of like best practices type thing. Now to describe the relationship between Palestinians and Israelis are colonizers. Palestinians are the colonized. You can also say occupier, but occupier doesn't really acknowledge the tactic in which they established this false colony. So colonizer is a little bit more accurate. All Israeli cities should be referred to as settlements, Zionist settlements, Israeli settlements. Instead of Israeli citizens or civilians, it should be settlers, Zionist settlers, Israeli settlers. Their military, called IDF, Israeli Defense Forces, should be called IOF, Israeli Occupation Forces. When describing the Palestinians, we say indigenous, native, the indigenous population, the native people of the land. Now to describe Palestine, that is a country, the country of Palestine. Prior to 1948, it was a fully functioning country with its own economy, its own population, and it just so happened that the Zionists established this settler colony on top of that country. The UN does not recognize Palestine as a country any longer, but for us, it still exists, and we're simply living under occupation, living under colonization. This one we cleared up a couple years ago during the Sheikh Jarrah social media boom. We don't say the Palestine-Israel conflict, Palestine-Israel war. It's the Israeli colonization of Palestine, Israeli occupation of Palestine. We have to actively reject the word conflict and war. Anytime we hear that, we should be correcting the person and saying, it's not a conflict or a war, it's colonization, it's an occupation. War insinuates that this is country to country, and again, that's not the case. Also, using war makes it seem like it's a one-time event, like what's happening in Gaza right now. Like a Gaza-Israel war started 11 days ago, when the issue goes far back, more than 75 years ago, when Israel was established as a settler colony. Which brings us to the topic of Gaza. So during times like right now, when Israel is bombing Gaza, and remember, this is nothing new. Every year, Israel carpet bombs Gaza for a given period of time. So during those periods of bombings, do not refer to it as a war, we call it a genocide. So don't say Israel-Gaza war, it's genocide of Gaza. And this isn't an exaggeration or trying to be dramatic, it's an actual genocide. Gaza is not a country on its own, it does not have a formal military, and all 2.1 million people are living under Israeli military blockade. They can't leave, so they're literally just sitting there waiting to get killed. Often killed in the hundreds, if not thousands, which is a genocide. Oftentimes we hear people describe Gaza as an open-air prison, when a more accurate description is concentration camp or extermination camp. Prison insinuates that it's a population of criminals living there. The difference between extermination and concentration is based on timing. So just in general, the default is it's a concentration camp. People are living inside and forced to stay inside. But when Israel is attacking Gaza, during those times, it's better to refer to it as an extermination camp, because these people are trapped in by land, sea, and air and are being bombed. Thousands of people exterminated. So extermination camp. So what do we call the movement to get back the country of Palestine? There's a few different words, but it kind of depends on what you're talking about. I think in most instances, the most appropriate word is decolonization, ejecting the settler colony and returning the land to its original state, the country of Palestine. We also use Palestinian liberation, which is just more generic and more broad. Liberation is a little bit more about the action that we're taking to obtain our goal. Our goal is to decolonize. How do we decolonize? Liberating the people. Decolonize is the goal, liberate is the means. Another word that falls in the same category as liberation is resistance. So like Palestinian resistance, as in resisting the occupier to obtain decolonization. Resistance is also an important word to remember for describing any acts or movements to reclaim the Palestinian land. Whether peaceful or non-peaceful, they're resistance tactics. Especially the word terrorism, which is a word used to antagonize and villainize Palestinians and Muslims and brown people in the media. Now, oftentimes in the media, when we hear about Palestinian refugees, they always use the verb fled or evacuated their land, which makes it seem like it was a choice that they had. Whereas the most accurate way to describe it is the ethnic cleansing of these people from their land. So instead of Palestinians fled their land, you say Palestinians were ethnically cleansed from their land. So where do words and phrases like apartheid, annexation, settlement expansion, military blockade, military occupation, how do all these words connect? To answer that, again, we have to take a step back and ask, what is happening to Palestine? And the answer is colonization. Colonization is the what? Israel is colonizing Palestine. Now, all those words, everything that's being done to Palestinians, everything that has been done to Palestinians, all of that falls under the umbrella of colonization. The slow immigration of a non-native population while pushing out the native population, which is the what. Underneath the what is the how. How are they colonizing Palestine? By ethnically cleansing the land of its indigenous people. In order to establish this colony, they have to cleanse out the original people there. They do so by land theft, annexation of land, stealing land from the original people, through apartheid, through a military occupation of the West Bank, through the military blockade of Gaza, acts done to Palestinians to make life there unlivable and inevitably push out the native people. For things like false imprisonment, there are over 5,000 Palestinians right now in Israeli prison, with the majority having never gone through any court system. When you see Palestinian homes being forcibly demolished by the IOF, their government permanently closing off Palestinian wells by pouring concrete in them, or even the mass bombings of Gaza. These are all means of ethnically cleansing the land. Ethnic cleansing isn't just a one-time deal like in 1948 when almost 1 million Palestinians were forced to leave their land. Palestinian ethnic cleansing is an ongoing process. It started back in 1948. Actually, prior to 48, but that's another topic. It is continuing till this day. And that's essentially the summary of all of the words that I went through in this video. They all lead back to Israeli colonization of Palestine. That's all. Remember to keep talking about Gaza, keep spreading the word, and keep them in your da'at. Allah yahmihum.
Of all the comments I've been getting in the last few days from Zionists, these are the ones that are pissing me off the most because of the multi-layered bullshit. So let's go through it. First, the claim that Palestinians as a whole, or even Hamas specifically, are unaliving LGBTQ people is bullshit. The claim that Israel is some haven for LGBTQ rights is bullshit. And thirdly, this whole premise that genocide should be excused or overlooked or even encouraged because a region's political leaders or even just some people in that region are anti-LGBTQ is utter bullshit. And let's start with that third one because that's the easiest to deal with. I live in Texas. My democratically elected, heavy on the air quotes, governor and state legislator leaders are virulently homophobic and transphobic. Just this year, they passed a law trying to criminalize my ability to appear in public as an author. They're banning my books. They're trying to make being a trans person illegal and impossible here. And a lot of my fellow Texans, once you get outside the inner loop of Houston, are very transphobic and homophobic as well, and give me funny looks and make me feel unsafe. And still, and yet, I can easily say that I stand against the genocide of Texans. Even if Greg Abbott passed a death penalty for queer people, I would stand against the genocide of Texans. Even if that law was voted in by a referendum of Texas voters and a majority, even if a consensus of them had agreed to that bill, I'd still be against the genocide of Texans because genocide is fucking wrong. What a concept. Now let's turn to the bullshit claim that Palestinians as a whole, or even Hamas specifically, are going around killing LGBTQ people as a matter of policy, something of which I've been informed of approximately 50,000 times over the past few days. Now, this commenter was likely referring to the murder last year of Ahmad Abu Maria, who was beheaded in the West Bank. May he rest in power. This was a horrific act that should absolutely be condemned, but it's not, as many of people in my comments have been seeming to imply, it was not carried out by Hamas. This is not the policy of the Palestinian Authority. This was a crime. Police found a suspect. Unfortunately, I too live in a country where people are murdered for being queer. Just a few months ago, pretty close to here, a woman was shot in front of her girlfriend at a gas station by a man shouting homophobic slurs here in Texas. Happens in Israel too. Shira Banki was murdered, stabbed in broad daylight at a pride parade in Jerusalem. I haven't been to Palestine or Israel. I can't say comparatively how much better or worse homophobia and transphobia are in those places, but I know they're shitty everywhere and I wish they were better. But again, no matter how bad they are, I know that doesn't excuse genocide against the people there. And what is the stance of the official leadership in Palestine? Well, in the West Bank, homosexuality has been decriminalized since 1950. In Gaza, under the leadership of Hamas, put a pin in that, homosexuality between two men has been criminalized and results in jail time, not beheading. But the beliefs of Hamas do not reject the opinions of the majority of Gazans. If you are still in the dark about this, you need to go read about how Israel created and to this day continues to fund de facto Hamas, because Hamas is a useful straw puppet on which to justify their imperialist aggression. And if you're not a reader and you don't want to go read about it, Interstellar Isabella has a really good video you can watch about it. And so, yeah, there are queerphobic Palestinians. There are queerphobic Palestinians in power. Just like there are queerphobic people in power everywhere. Like right now, literally, that is the central platform of the right-wing parties in the UK and the US. And in my personal limited experience, I've spent a lot of time organizing with people from SJP and PYM. I've been to many different protests for a free Palestine here in Houston, more recently in New York. And I've never experienced any homophobia from anyone at any of those events. After I got this explosion of new followers in the last few days, many of whom are Palestinian, I just put out a video reminding people, hey, I'm trans, these are my pronouns. I got nothing but an outpouring of support from Palestinian commenters for the most part. I did get quite a few nasty transphobic comments from Zionists though. Maybe if I'd been spouting Zionist propaganda instead, those responses would have been flipped. Maybe, I don't know, but all I can say is in my limited experience, never experienced any homophobia from a Palestinian person, not once. And guess what? There are plenty of queer Palestinians who are out there fighting for their rights. In 2019, the West Bank tried to ban LGBTQ groups, and there was such a backlash. There was such an outpouring of protests led by the queer rights group Al-Cause that they rescinded that ban. And Al-Cause put out a great article that everyone should read called Beyond Propaganda, Pinkwashing as Colonial Virus. And that brings us to our third bullshit premise. That Israel is this haven of LGBTQ rights. A genocidal apartheid state can never be a haven of LGBTQ rights, but Israel isn't even a haven of LGBTQ rights for white Jewish LGBTQ Israelis. Netanyahu came to power in this last election by embracing the support of openly homophobic and racist party members. Israel has not legalized same-sex marriage, though they do accept same-sex marriages that happen abroad because anything to get more white settlers to come to Israel, Just like in Texas, for queer white Israelis, they live in a country where in some urban centers, they may be able to live openly as queer, but they do not have equal rights, and powerful members of their government are openly hostile to them. But what about everyone who's not a white Jew? How's Israel for their LGBTQ rights? Well, for them, regardless of whether they're queer or straight, Israel violates their human rights because that is what a white supremacist ethno-state does. Black Jews who've immigrated to Israel have faced severe discrimination, including forced sterilization without their consent or knowledge at the hands of the Israeli government, queer and straight alike. Because Israel paints itself as this haven for LGBTQ rights, there is a very small number of Palestinians who have gone there to seek asylum for being queer. But because they are Palestinian, they have been denied the protections of other asylum seekers. The discrimination they face has been so terrible they feel less safe in Israel, and led one person in this article to say, I'd rather have died in the West Bank if I'd known how bad it was going to be in Israel. And finally, just the ultimate bullshit that renders everything else moot is that there is no possibility of LGBTQ allyship when a country is actively committing genocide. there are queer adults living in Gaza right now. Maybe they're living stealth life, but if you're like me and you know that there are queer people everywhere, they are there. And there are, of course, queer kids in Gaza too. And as sophisticated as the Israeli military is, they don't have bombs that can miss queer kids. Those kids will never have a chance to grow up because they're being massacred by the Israeli military. 50% of people living in Gaza are minors. This is a city of kids. And so every time a bomb falls, every time there's an attack, half of those victims are going to be kids. Israel has cut off all food, electricity, and water to Gaza for a week now. And you know who succumbs first to starvation and dehydration? Those fucking kids. It doesn't fucking matter if they're straight or queer. They're kids. It doesn't matter if every one of those kids is a raging homophobe. They're fucking children. They don't have food and water. They don't have any way to get it unless Israel lets it through. They're children and they're being starved and bombed and denied the very basic necessities for human survival of food and water and shelter and security. So whether you are queer or straight, if you have any humanity in your heart, you need to do whatever you can right now to speak out against this genocide. Call your representatives, use your platform to speak out. If you have money, you can donate. You can donate to the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, which only provides medical attention on the ground in Gaza to these kids that are suffering. The money won't go to fucking Hamas. Pitting straight people against queer people is a tool of empire. It's a tool of white supremacy, and we are not going to let them divide us.
Another reason that the US and Israel are having a meltdown right now, and which we haven't considered yet, and we should talk about it, is that usually the US and Israel and like Western governments, when they want to intervene anywhere in the Middle East, they use all these like, you know, crazy things. One of them is, oh, like those Arabs, those Muslim men, they oppress their women, like they beat them, they behead them, you know, all this stuff. And then they're like, yeah, so let's invade them to free the women, right? So I think that they would have deployed that type of justification immediately because, you know, they're running out of propaganda, clearly, but they would have used it. However, it's so crazy. They are unable to use it this time, even if they want to like make up stuff. It's going to be so hard for them to like make up something like that because somehow the people that have become the face of this genocide and bringing awareness about it, at least, you know, on social media, are women that, you know, speak fluent English and who are not, don't wear the hijab, which, you know, there's nothing wrong with wearing it, but, you know, they use that argument to say, oh, it's oppressive, blah, blah. So, yeah, women that look just like any woman in the West, right? What that shows the world is that, A, these women are going out at night, pulling people out of rubble, reporting on all of the bombings. They're separated from their families. By the way, a lot of these women are not even with their families. They got separated like because they're having to report. And they don't have a man by their side forcing them to be at home and, you know, cook and clean. The reason that all these women are able to do it is obviously because they grew up in families with fathers and brothers that enabled them to do that and did not lock them inside and not give them an education or some, you know, crazy shit like that. And yeah, like speaking personally, my dad always gave me whatever opportunity I wanted, and anything that I felt like doing, he always encouraged and told me to, you know, go for it, try new things. And he gave me that space to be able to talk for myself and, you know, defend myself the way that I want. Like, he was there to support me, but he wasn't like someone who controlled me. And I think that the same is true of the fathers of all of these women. I'm sure that this is how they were taught. And the fact that all of us speak fluent English and, you know, are described as very eloquent and articulate by everyone in the world at this moment is a testament that education is number one for Palestinians. Whether you're a woman or a man, education is number one, and it's especially important for women. Like, women are very educated, and they are perhaps even more educated than men in Palestine, and it's showing through this whole thing. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure this is contributing to the meltdown, because I'm sure they want to pull that card. I know they want to pull it, because if you check my TikToks in the past, all the comments in Gaza were people telling me, oh, but the Hamas is not gonna let you wear this, or oh, you can't be with your hair in Gaza, even though like I was literally walking down the street with short sleeves and my hair, and it's like, are you serious? But now they can't say anything, and I think this is a part of the meltdown. I'm certain it is, because by now, like knowing them, they would have, they would have played that card, especially the U.S. government. They would have used it. I'm sure Biden was like, oh, what about women's oppression? Like, what about these women? Like, can we say that they're killing their women? And then, Israelis were like, damn, no, like, we got this girl, Plistia, with her hair, and, like, she's so fluent in English, and people love her. Like, there's no way to cover it up that way.
When you carpet bomb people who are living under a colonial siege and constant bombardment, the only effect it can have is to strengthen people's fury, anger, and resolve to resist the colonizing power. So of course it won't break resistance. Even if they were to destroy the Hamas infrastructure, something else would emerge in its place. So why? Why are they doing this? It's not, by the way, because Hamas caused the problem, because in the West Bank, where there is no Hamas regime, settlers have attacked funerals in the last week and launched attacks on Palestinian villages, killing parents and children. And the IDF has shot and killed 62 Palestinians in the last week, when I last checked, in the West Bank, which is a place that does not have a Hamas government. And before this latest massacre, 2023 was already the deadliest year on record for children in the West Bank, with one child murdered every week by Israeli forces. So it isn't because there's a resistance enclave that Israel's violent. It seems to have this lashing out violent impulse regardless. The reason is that it's the logic of the colonizer. The reason is that Israelis know deep down, and I'm speaking here of some of my own family members, so it pains me, but they know deep down that they are living in other people's stolen homes. They know that they are living in a state that was premised on an act of ethnic cleansing when 700,000 Palestinians were driven from their homes. That's why Gaza is so densely populated, because most of the Palestinians living in Gaza aren't from Gaza. They're refugees penned in there because they were chased out of other parts of Israel. And that's why the important thing to do now is not simply to call for peace, not simply to call for the end of this massacre, though that is crucial, but to understand that we want a world in which people don't live penned into an open-air prison because they're chased from their homes, to call not simply for peace but for freedom.
Speaking of sharing, this is actor and writer Ramzi Nasr. His mother is Dutch and his father is Palestinian, and I really wanted to share what he had to say.
Alle gijzelaars, alle doden uit Israël en Europa hebben hun namen gekregen. Hun familieleden en vrienden zijn gehoord hier op tv, in de krant. Hun levens, dromen, idealen zijn ons bekend voor altijd. En ik vind dat terecht. Wel heb ik een vraag. Hebben Palestijnse levens eenzelfde waarde voor ons? Kennen wij ook de namen van hun dode baby's, hun vernederde grootouders en vermoorde kinderen? Kennen wij hun individuele dromen, vrienden, schoolrapporten? Palestijnse levens worden doorgaans per aantal genoemd. 48 doden. 1200 gewonden. Geen namen, maar nummers. En dit geeft aan hoe wij ons mededogen verdelen. Want ook Palestijnen worden levend verbrand. Ook Palestijnse dorpen kennen pogroms, uitgevoerd door Israëli's. Palestijnse kinderen worden gemarteld, zitten jaren gevangen zonder aanklacht of hulp. En dit gebeurt generatie op generatie, al meer dan 75 jaar. En misschien zijn we daardoor immuun geworden. Het zijn voor ons geen mensen, het is verzameld leed. Houdt het dan nooit op. Maar voor mij is het familie. En ook ik denk, houdt het dan nooit op. Alleen heb ik het over de blinde steun aan een voor mij overduidelijk systeem van apartheid en etnische zuivering. Premier Rutte zei na de Hamas-aanslagen: we hebben niet zo heel vaak meegemaakt dat dit conflict zich richt op heel gewone mensen. Kennelijk ziet hij Palestijnen niet als gewone mensen. Maar ze zijn er. Wij bestaan. Het piepkleine Gaza telt 2,2 miljoen inwoners. Bijna de helft van hen is nog een kind. Van alle kinderen in Gaza is 80% gediagnosticeerd als depressief. Vragen wij ons ooit af wat zij dromen? Israël zegt tegen 2 miljoen wanhopige burgers dat ze in 1 dag allemaal naar het zuiden moeten gaan. Zogezegd voor hun veiligheid. En daarna bombardeert Israël deze vluchtelingen in het zuiden. Israël geeft hele ziekenhuizen de tip te verkassen omdat het noorden zal worden weggevaagd. Maar hoe? Hoe kunnen zieken en gewonden, gekluisterd aan medische apparatuur, weg uit de ziekenhuizen? Bejaarden, zieken, gehandicapten, de zwaksten. Zij blijven dus achter en gaan hun lot tegemoet. Gisteravond aanschouwden wij zo'n lot. Een overvol ziekenhuis in Gaza-stad werd getroffen. En ik bekeek de beelden en ik zag een man rondlopend met een plastic tasje. Hij hield het voor zich uit boven de menigte alsof het een kostbaar brood bevatte. Het was geen brood. In het doorschijnende tasje zaten de restjes vlees en botten van zijn kinderen. En ik ben gaan zitten en ik heb gejankt als een dier. Er is iets mis met de menselijkheid. Die van onszelf en van een ieder die toekijkt en niet ingrijpt. 1 wens heb ik nog, want dromen bestaan niet in deze hel. Dat iemand van de honderdduizenden Palestijnse vluchtelingen, doden en gewonden, de namen zal noteren. En dan avond na avond hun familieleden zal interviewen op nationale televisie. Dit komt neer op talloze tv-uitzendingen. Het zou absurd zijn, maar wel eerlijk.
Hey everybody, I'm Dan McClellan. I'm a scholar of the Bible and religion, and I am on social media to increase public access to the academic study of the Bible and religion and to combat the spread of misinformation about the Bible and religion. So let's take a look at a video.
Hamas is a Palestinian acronym for the Islamic Resistance Movement. It is also an Arabic word that means zeal.
All right, let's see it.
Hamas is also a Hebrew word in the Bible. It appears here in Genesis 6:11, in the days of Noah. Now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence. Hamas. Hamas is the Hebrew word for violent evil.
Well, it just means violence, wrongdoing, malice, something like that. And it is unrelated to the name of this terrorist organization.
And that word filled is sometimes translated, including in Jeremiah, if memory serves me correct, as possessed. The whole world was possessed by the spirit of Hamas.
So loads of problems with this entirely arbitrary attempt to gin up a sense for this passage that is not at all indicated by the actual words being used. The verbal root malah just means to fill or to be full. It occurs in Genesis 6:11 in the nephal stem, meaning it is reflexive or passive, so to be filled with or to be full of. There are 22 occurrences of this verbal root in the book of Jeremiah, and I looked at all 22 of them across 5 different English translations of the Bible and couldn't find a single instance of anybody rendering this possessed. But even if I could, that would not mean we could just arbitrarily decide that it means possessed in Genesis 6:11. That's not how language works. The context and the actual morphology of the verb determine what the meaning is. Absolutely nothing supports this arbitrary rendering that Mark has just ginned up here.
It's demonic possession globally. Demonic possession is the counterfeit of being filled with the Spirit. Hamas is a spirit. I'm telling you that Hamas is a demonic spirit that has been at work since the days of Noah. What did God do to everyone who had the spirit of Hamas in the days of Noah? He flooded the earth and destroyed them. The spirit of Hamas that possessed all people caused them to be destroyed, and the only people who survived and lived were not filled with the Hamas spirit, but the Holy Spirit.
Like Bobby Boucher's mom, Mark Driscoll thinks everything's the devil. and it's not. Saying that everything you don't like is demonic possession is just a way to divide the world into everybody who's for me and everybody who's for the devil. And all that does is make it easier to exploit people and to reduce complex issues into little simple binaries that serve your structuring of power and that serve your personal interests. And Mark's not even that good at it. Unfortunately, there are just a lot of people in the world who don't know what's going on and are going to reach for the simplest and the closest solution, and Mark is happy to sell that solution to you.